This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Good afternoon, and welcome to PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing Forward. I'm your host, Brittany Mellinger, and I serve as the Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. In this show, we explore all things housing with the experts, advocates, and community leaders working to expand access to housing. Today, we'll be discussing the topic of housing protections for immigrants and survivors of domestic violence. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show my colleague, Tamara Shehadeh-Cope. Tamara Shehadeh-Cope is a hearing examiner with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, which is Pennsylvania's leading civil rights enforcement agency. In her current role, she serves as an adjudicator and presides over cases relating to the alleged discrimination in housing, employment, commercial property, education, and public accommodations. Prior to joining the PHRC, Shehadeh-Cope practiced immigration law and represented asylees and immigrant survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking before the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. She has also worked diligently to provide trauma-informed advocacy to crime victims and to facilitate access to free legal services through her outreach work. Shehadeh-Cope is a graduate of the City University of New York School of Law and Fordham University. Welcome, Hearing Examiner Shehadeh-Cope, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we all have a story to share about how we got to our current work and vocation. I'd like to start our conversation this afternoon by inviting you to share your journey to your current work.
Sure. So I have been here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for a little over 14 years now. I'm a Brooklyn native. I was born in New York City to two parents who immigrated to the United States in the 70s and 80s. And so I think, being the second generation eldest child of immigrant parents equips you with a bit of a unique perspective on life and, very ethnically diverse, very culturally, religiously diverse upbringing. And so I knew at a very early age, I had an awareness of the various systems that family members were navigating in order to build a life here in the United States. And with that, I also saw who the system protected and who it didn't necessarily protect, and who experienced barriers to, getting what they needed at the time. And so really just always having an awareness. I also always had an interest in human rights work and international human rights work that just grew as I got older. And, with the decision to go to law school, came the knowledge that I wanted to dedicate my life to public service. And if it was something that was, that had to do with international human rights, even better. And so really, I talk about my early experiences because it really did shape, who I wanted to be and who I wanted to assist. And so I practiced immigration law for a number of years, and I served detained individuals at York County Prison here at the Commonwealth at the time, and then my work transitioned to serving domestic violence survivors who were either undocumented or non-citizens. And in that work, I came to witness a lot of the adversities and a lot of the discrimination that a lot of my clients were experiencing. And so it felt like a natural progression into the work now at the PHRC, where I can continue to serve communities that are experiencing these traumatic events and hopefully assist and have more of an impact on a larger scale.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and how you got to your current work. I'm sure your previous work really informs the work that you do today here at PHRC as well. But I'd like to start our conversation focusing on your earlier legal work. So you had provided legal services to immigrants. Can you share a little bit more about who you served and what your day-to-day work looked like?
Sure, I'd love to. My early work in the immigration legal field was with immigrant detainees who were awaiting their hearings and removal proceedings. So they were individuals that were being detained at the York County Prison at the time, which has since closed. Now there is a facility at Moshannon Valley that houses individuals. And so I was part of a nationwide program administered by the Department of Justice that provided legal orientation to individuals awaiting hearing. So immigration proceedings are administrative civil proceedings, and so similar to other civil proceedings, there isn't a right to counsel that you might see in a criminal context. And so a lot of individuals end up appearing pro se or representing themselves in removal proceedings. A lot of individuals come to the United States with very limited knowledge of the immigration laws or a very limited idea of what to expect once here. And so really my job was to go in, provide these legal education classes, essentially describing what you can expect when you go into court, who is sitting where, what are the questions that you might be asked, what are some potential forms of relief, that you might be eligible for, and here are some pro se materials that might aid you in your process. So in addition to that, I was also providing legal representation to individuals who were asylum seekers, who were requesting asylum, or cancellation removal, which is a form of relief for someone who has been here for a number of years. And so that transitioned into later on working with survivors. And so I went from a more defensive process, right, in removal defense and being in court, to more of an application-based process. And so that work with survivors of domestic violence was certainly different. We were submitting applications to USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And also I was working with individuals who might have been victimized by human traffickers as well, or were victims of sexual assault or similar interpersonal violence. And so a lot of my work was in providing relief under VAWA as well as UNT visas.
Wow. I want to make sure that all of our viewers who are with us this afternoon who might not have as extensive of a background in immigration as you do understand who we're talking about. Would you be able to share and clarify the difference on what an asylee is versus a refugee versus someone that's undocumented? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to, yes. So I'm really with an asylee, and of course these are terms that we see a lot in the news, especially as of late. And so really asylees and refugees, the difference is largely contingent on where the individual that is applying for that relief is. So a refugee is someone who is outside of their country of nationality, who can't return to their country of nationality because they've either experienced persecution or they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or because they belong to a particular social group. And so refugees are typically going through the application process when they're outside of the United States prior to coming in. And so they're coming in. And then eventually, once in the United States and once resettled, after a certain period of time, they can go on and apply for permanent residence, and there is a pathway to citizenship there. An asylee is a refugee. Similarly, there is a fear of return to their country because of the reasons that I just described. The difference is an asylee is already here in the United States. So they might be at a port of entry seeking admission to the United States, or they might have already been here for a time, and they are also similarly afraid of persecution. They have that well-founded fear of persecution, or they have experienced persecution in their country of origin. And I appreciate the second part of your question about really the different terminology, because I will say just immigration law is so vast, right? So when we look at asylum and refugee status, these are more humanitarian forms of relief for someone. But we also have, in immigration law, family-based petitions. A large number of individuals come to the U.S. Because they have an immediate family member, for example, that is a U.S. citizen, and they're petitioning for them. And so really, there are just a number of ways, essentially, that someone can immigrate to the United States. So in terms of, other terms that we hear often, right, so, you might hear me say that someone is undocumented or a non-citizen. I very specifically stay away from the term illegal. And it is more accurate to state that someone is maybe here illegally or unlawfully, but that someone is undocumented, meaning they might not have any status at all, as opposed to a non-citizen who, might be here temporarily, who might have a green card, permanent residence, but just might not be a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So that way we all are on the same page about what we're talking about and who we're talking about. Could you talk a little bit about what role language barriers played for the folks that you serve? Getting into the housing part of our conversation, did it cause any challenges in getting into housing or maintaining housing for your clients?
Right. So a lot of my work focused on the immigration law aspect, right? The immigration component, the immigration application process. But of course, in that work, as you're building that foundation of trust with your client, and especially wherever they might be in the process allows them to, obtain certain additional benefits, you end up hearing a lot and kind of witnessing a lot of, what they might have experienced in their other spheres of life. And so housing is definitely one example of that. For many individuals that I served, language barriers were a huge obstacle to obtaining services and housing services in particular. So, just as an example, someone might be wanting to go and, to apply for housing, and the front office or, the renter might not have, for example, a language access plan. And so that means the individual might not receive the application in a language that they understand, or they might not have access to interpretation services. And so that individual is already at a disadvantage from the get-go, and that can also be a deterrent to trying to kind of move forward and with the process. Fortunately, I was really fortunate to work with organizations that provided accompaniment services whereby someone would go with an individual and assist in, if there weren't any, language accommodations for the person with limited English proficiency, they would be able to kind of facilitate that. Another hurdle that you might experience is, of course, once you clear that, you might be experiencing discrimination based on your language proficiency. You might be experiencing discrimination based on your national origin, based on a number of different things that, are part of one's identity. And so, it certainly was something that I witnessed in my work with individuals seeking housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you share maybe some specific examples of what types of discrimination would look like for your clients, what they experience?
Certainly. So there is there is an intersection with the work that I do now at the PHRC and just, with the types of discrimination that the PHRC works to address. And so certainly, I have seen individuals being discriminated against based on their race, their religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and so on. And so certainly, that someone who is undocumented or non-citizen is not excluded from experiencing these other forms of discrimination. Right. And so, for example, someone might be eligible for subsidized housing or some kind of, a Section 8 voucher or to apply for a certain federally funded housing, but be turned away even though they're eligible because the front office may or may not know that they are eligible. And the trouble is you never know which one it is, right? And outside of that, certainly someone can be discriminated against based on their immigration status, being asked for information that they just don't have at the moment. So yes, certainly, I would say the forms of discrimination are pretty broad that someone might experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those examples. I'd like to turn now to talk a little bit about VAWA. So you assisted clients in obtaining legal relief under VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women's Act. Can you share with us a little bit about what this law is? Is it specifically protections for women?
Not specifically protections for women. Anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. Anyone can be an abuser. But it is, just in the name. But the programs that came about as a result of the passage of VAWA, aren't limited to women. It really can assist anyone who has been experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, related crimes. And so VAWA is a federal law that was signed in 1994 and has been reauthorized numerous times over the years, most recently in 2022. And really, just generally, before I talk about kind of how it impacted my work directly, it really signified a shift in the way that we look at domestic violence and sexual assault, whereby in the past it might have been considered to be a private matter, as a result of grassroots advocacy for decades preceding the passage of VAWA, asking Congress to adopt legislation that would specifically address domestic violence, sexual assault. We had it signed into law. And so a big thing that it did, among many other things, was establish the Office on Violence Against Women, which in turn administers a number of grants that continue to be funded today and that specifically work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, interpersonal violence. And so a lot of those grants have enabled a number of organizations really on the ground to continue to work more closely with survivors. It also brought in an era of collaboration, which I think is incredibly important, between law enforcement, prosecutors, social service agencies, and I think, and victim service advocates. It really, this kind of idea of a collaborative effort to ensure that individuals who are victimized are, one, informed of their rights, have recourse in whatever way it looks like to them, and are able to find stability after leaving an abusive relationship. And in addition to that, there are also a number of immigration provisions in VAWA, and some of them came with subsequent amendments. But for example, for individuals who rely on U.S. citizen spouse petitioning for them in order to obtain immigration status, VAWA recognized the possibility of that kind of power imbalance, right? The way the immigration process is structured, essentially there has to be a petitioner and the individual they petition for. And so it might become easy for a petitioner to hold that over the individual they're petitioning for. And so VAWA sought to address that by making it so that someone who is married to a U.S. citizen who would have been otherwise eligible to become a lawful permanent resident by them applying for them, can self-petition. They no longer would require that second party when they have been the victim of domestic violence. And as well as later on, the U visa and the T visas are also opportunities for individuals who are victims of crimes, of specific crimes, to qualify for status here in the United States, as well as individuals who are victims of human trafficking. And again, that extends it to immigrant communities. It's not just limited to individuals who are documented or citizens of the United States.
Yeah, I imagine those protections are hugely important to folks who have been victims themselves, and to be able to have that stability must be life-changing because of that. I'd like to ask you to focus more specifically on some of the housing provisions within VAWA. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. VAWA really, among the many things that it does, it provided protections for federally subsidized tenants. So, for example, individuals that have Section 8 vouchers or who reside in public housing. And so it makes it so that someone wouldn't be able to be turned away or evicted because of their status as a domestic violence survivor. Similarly, you would be able to request an emergency transfer, or be allowed to relocate because of a domestic violence situation, an abusive situation. And also there is an opportunity to request a lease of bifurcation, essentially removing the perpetrator of violence from a lease. Mm-hmm. And so there are a number of protections in that sense for survivors of domestic violence in housing.
There's been a lot of rhetoric around immigration in the United States lately and a lot of divisive opinions. Based on your work with the individuals that you served and what you saw of the experiences within the immigration system, is there anything that you think our viewers should know?
Certainly. I think that, we live in this era of just access to a wealth of information. But what that does in turn is it also makes it the opportunity for misinformation to occur more quickly, be spread more rapidly. And so I guess really, it's so important. So I guess I have two messages. One is for the communities of individuals who are undocumented, maybe don't have stable status, who are non-citizens, who may be experiencing, discrimination, and who may be interested, for example, in coming to the PHRC to report what's happening to them. Certainly, I would say, it's important to come forward. I think it's important to know that you have rights, no matter, regardless of your status here in the United States, and among those rights is, you have the rights to be protected from unlawful discrimination. Of course, if there are any concerns relating to immigration status, and outside of discrimination, if there's any kind of information that is being spread that you're concerned about as it relates to your immigration status, it is incredibly important to reach out to a trusted immigration services provider, who can advise you on the best course of action. And I think and similarly for individuals who aren't in that position, but who may be hearing certain rumors about who comprises the immigrant community. Again, I think, immigrants are such an amazing, valuable part of our Commonwealth who have made amazing contributions. And I think, the information is out there on our, economic strength, on the spending power of immigrants, on all the ways that they've made Pennsylvania better. And so, again, just really encouraging individuals to continue to inform themselves and not be afraid to have difficult conversations and to learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to shift gears now and ask you to talk a little bit about your work as a hearing examiner at PHRC. How is serving in this role different than advocating on behalf of a client?
Yes, it certainly has been different. It's something that I continue to learn, something new every day. Certainly as a hearing examiner, because you are essentially an independent adjudicator, so you take on a more neutral role, a facilitative role, as opposed to being kind of the advocate ready to storm into court and defend your client. And so I think it really has been different in its nature, but I think it's certainly something that has suited my just myself, my personality, and just kind of my state of being. But I don't think that it differs in the sense that, at the end of the day, you're working alongside individuals that are all having, the goal is to provide, justice, to seek justice for someone who has been wronged. And so, in my role, how do we get there? And it's to ensure that due process is had, that individuals are going through this process, that they have the opportunity to be heard, and that whatever decision comes from a public hearing, for example, whatever recommendation comes of it, takes into account everything, just in an independent manner, in a trauma-informed manner. And just like in a manner that really furthers the goals of the PHRC.
So we've talked a lot about some of the broader issues within the immigration system, but would you be willing to share any success stories about how gaining legal status has impacted your clients' lives?
Yes, I think it's incredibly impactful. It was hard to really think about just one story, just because I've seen, and sometimes it doesn't even get to the point where someone obtains legal status. A lot of times in their process, someone might receive work authorization, and that in and of itself is life-changing for someone who might have an application pending, and the U.S. government says, okay, in the interim, because we know these applications take a long time, here, you can have work authorization where you can work lawfully, be gainfully employed in the Commonwealth. And that opens a number of doors, from being able to access a driver's license, having identification. Individuals with minor children, even though the children can't work, they now have photo ID, specific to the United States. And so really lifting the burden of having that, those concerns, the instability, the concerns that you might get picked up by immigration enforcement. Maybe it might open up opportunities for employment that may not have been available to someone without work authorization. And of course, eventually when someone does get to a point where they have, lawful status, they might be able to bring family over. They might be able to, go back to school. A lot of my clients, that was their number one goal. I want to go back to school. And so I've witnessed just the changes in, just mentally, emotionally, how empowering that can be. And I've been so fortunate to kind of witness some of these journeys, that individuals have experienced, from maybe having met me at a domestic violence shelter to now, owning your own home and your children are off to college. It really is amazing and life-changing.
Well, I could talk with you all afternoon, but I'm afraid our time is about at an end. So Hearing Examiner Shehadeh-Cope, thank you so much for taking the time to come and share with us on the show, help us learn a little bit more about the work that you did previously as an advocate and now as a hearing examiner. I have learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure.
Absolutely. I would also like to thank our viewers for spending their afternoon learning with us. If you believe that you've experienced housing discrimination or would like to learn more about housing protections in Pennsylvania, give us a call at PHRC's Fair Housing Line, 855-866-5718. You can also find us at our website on the screen, which is www.pa.gov/en/agencies/PHRC. You can also keep up with our work on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And remember, our communities are stronger when everyone has a place to call home. We'll see you next time.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.